Okay, our next theory of personality is one that we've already covered, excuse me, and that is Galen's theory with regard to bodily humors, and the one he adapted from Empedocles, who believed the four physics were earth, air, fire, and water, and then Hippocrates, who believed that the humors in the body were also of four types, and then Galen added that those four types, based on the preponderance or whichever one there was a greater concentration of in the body, depending on the individual, that led to a certain personality. And as you recall, those with a preponderance of blood were or are sanguine, according to Galen. Sanguine being an English word, it means happy. Those with excessive phlegm are phlegmatic, meaning listless or apathetic. Those with a higher concentration of black bile are choleric or angry. And with yellow bile, those with concentration of yellow bile, they are melancholic or sad. Okay, I put this in here for historic purposes. Remember, there's no evidence to support this theory. This is just a good try by an erudite scholar a couple of thousand years ago. And it was important because psychology was well before its formal inception. Okay, now, behavioral psychologists also have contributed to our understanding of personality. They don't have any theory in particular regarding personality. It's just that, as you recall, behaviorists believe everything is learned. Thus, personality must be learned. So, remember that learning is idiosyncratic, meaning that everybody has their own unique learning history. And therefore, the behavioral viewpoint regarding personality is helpful because it, better than any other theory, explains the wide variety or wide variation that you see in human personalities. Think about all the people you know, think about how different each of them are, their behavioral makeup, or their just who they are and how they behave in certain situations, and their inclinations, and what fascinates them. All of these things make us unique. And what best explains this unique nature of each individual is the behavioral viewpoint. Social cognitive theorists, whereas some of the other theories are more global, particularly the behavioral theory, social cognitive theorists attempt to explain one facet of personality, and that is our inclination toward depression. So this is a narrow focus, and the basis for this viewpoint comes from work done on the phenomenon of learned helplessness. In this work, the seminal work on this phenomenon was done by Martin Seligman. And it's helpful at this point to understand a famous experiment that he conducted. Seligman took dogs, or used dogs as research participants, and brought them to his lab and assigned them to one of three conditions. First condition was the control condition. These dogs had a shock harness placed around them and were put into a enclosure and were not given any shock. This was the control group. The shock apparatus was the same as the other dogs, and the enclosure in which they were placed the same as the other dogs. The other two groups actually got shock. There was the controllable shock group. Controllable shock. This group of dogs had the shock harness placed on them. They were put in the enclosure, and they were given random shocks, painful, intensity greater than the amount usually used. The voltage was higher than what is usually used in psych experiments. And these dogs, if they hit a button that was on the wall with their nose or with their head, they could stop the shock. So they had the ability to get negative reinforcement. They were able to get away from the shock by performing an operant behavior. The third group was the uncontrollable shock group. Uncontrollable shock. Same shock harness, same enclosure, same shock. This time, however, the dogs were unable to cease the shock that they were receiving. So these dogs simply received random, unpredictable shock, painful shock, and they had no recourse. There was nothing they could do. Okay, so on the following session, which is usually the next day, Seligman brought these dogs to another apparatus in his lab, as you can see down at the bottom right. That is called a shuttle box. And the dogs were placed on one side of the shuttle box, and they were given presentation of a light, and then the light went off, and then the floor was shocked. And if the dogs jumped over the barrier to the other side, they could escape the shock. And eventually, because there was a signal that the shock was coming, they could avoid the shock. Okay, and what Seligman found was that the dogs in the controllable shock and the control condition both learned this escape/avoidance behavior very quickly. The dogs in the uncontrollable shock group, however, failed to learn it. They were placed on one side of the shuttle box, light came on, shock was presented, and they simply laid on the floor whimpering in pain from the shock. Why was this done? Seligman proposed that this was a model or a laboratory analog of human depression. In other words, human depression occurs when when aversive conditions exist, things that hurt you are occurring and you can't do anything about it. So you learn, I can't do anything about this, then you generalize it to other situations. So you in general have this sense about you that I can't do anything about the aversive conditions in my life. This is also used as the basis for cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, because Seligman went in, or his lab assistants went in, and when those uncontrollable shock dogs were being shocked in the shuttle box, What they did was they picked them up, placed them on the other side of the shuttle box to where there was no shock. Then, when the light went on the other side and they were shocked, the lab assistants picked up the dogs and put them on the other side. And they did that several times. And guess what happened? The dogs learn that, oh, I can do something. There is a way to get away from this painful stimulus. And eventually they learn to escape from the shock and eventually avoid the shock. And that is the basis for cognitive therapy. To show someone, usually through talking, not picking somebody up and actually doing actions like this, but by explaining to someone or convincing them that they can do something about painful life events. Now, from this, there were two other individuals who contributed to social cognitive theories, and I present them together because they're very similar. They both have to do with just what Seligman was talking about. Rotter presented the concept of locus of control. Locus of control, there's two types of locus of control, internal or external. And it refers to where do you think control lies in the world? Within you or within other people or other events? In other words, do you have control over the events in your life? If you believe so, you have an internal locus of control. If you believe not, then you have an external locus of control. Rotter, of course, the goal of his therapeutic interventions was to give people an internal locus of control because it inoculates people against depression. Because once again, Seligman, what leads to depression? The feeling that you can't do anything about aversive events. Rotter says take an internal locus of control. Remember, there's two sides to this. If you take an internal locus of control, when things happen things don't go right, there's failures. Well, guess what? You have to take responsibility. And internal locus of control can actually go beyond the things that you actually can control. So it's sort of a belief beyond what is actual reality about what you can control. And this always makes me think about sort of an adaptive mechanism that many people have. Say someone has experienced a death in their family or to a friend, and you go up to comfort them, give them solace, and they'll say something like, if I just did this or did that, and this might not have happened. And you realize, of course, this is ridiculous. This is like their father or mother. This is an older person. This person was ill, and they were close to dying. And whatever this event was that your friend thinks that they should have done, it would have had very little to do with helping the person who died. But you also should realize that that's a way of inoculating yourself. Because the person is experiencing guilt. I should have done this, I should have done that, when you know it's ridiculous. But what that's giving them is the sense that when horrible things happen in the world, I can do something about it. In this case, I didn't do something, and that's why this happened. But going forward, instead of experiencing the world as this place where horrible things can happen and they're well beyond my control, I experience the world as a place where, yes, things can happen that are aversive, but I can react and overcome them. Bandura's self-efficacy is roughly the same thing. He worked with people clinically to try to give them a sense of self-efficacy, or that they can have an effect on their lives, on the events in their lives. And that's roughly the same. It's in keeping with the other two individuals here.